Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. We have an important show for you today. There's a lot of debate out there whether or not the keto diet works for bodybuilders or people who want to have great physiques. Obviously, we're talking about building and maintaining muscle. And we're going to be joined by my guest today, Adam Tzur, in just a moment to talk about a recent paper that his group published just on this specific topic. And I think we have a good story to tell you today. But before we do any of that, we have to thank my title sponsor, Legendary Foods. Wearing their shirt today. I love it. Like, why don't I have any Legendary shirts? EatLegendary.com is the website. SHR is the code. Save 10% off. If you're a low-carb guy like me, you're going to love Legendary Foods, especially their Pop-Tart, which is actually called a tasty pastry. But it looks like a Pop-Tart. Pop-Tart tastes like a Pop-Tart. But the difference is it has less than 1 gram of sugar, less than 3 to 4 impact carbs, 9 grams of high-quality, high-leucine protein. So if you're somebody who cares about your macros, you'll love Legendary Foods and their tasty pastry. And now I will bring my guest on, Adam Tzur. How you doing, Adam?
I'm doing quite well, and I'm very happy to be on the show, Carl. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here, actually. So you're joining us today from all the way from Norway, right?
Yeah, I am. I'm Norwegian. Many people think that I am American because my name does sound a bit American, but I'm actually from Norway, but working with American researchers and so on.
Right. And recently, you worked with American researchers looking at the ever-popular ketogenic diet, because there's always this debate going on. Keto is good for this, keto is not good for that. And there's been a lot of people who have said that keto really isn't any good if you're a bodybuilder. There's lots of discussion. I'm sure we're going to have questions. If you want to ask questions, feel free to post your questions. Nothing is off topic here. And before we get into the discussion, we really do have to thank, or at least recognize, your co-author, Brandon Roberts, who worked with you on this research, correct?
Yes, Brandon Roberts is we've been working together for, I believe it's 3 years now, and he's an excellent researcher from the University of Alabama at Birmingham.
Okay. And anybody who posts questions, we will answer every question. We will address every question and comment, but you have to give us a chance to let the discussion unfold, so to speak. So let's first talk about your research. Why this research? What discussions preceded this that required you to look at this topic?
Sure. So I have to give you some background first on the site that I've been running. So I started a website in 2016 called scifit.net, sci-fit.net, and it's the science of fitness, right? And on this site, we review literature. It's like an international collaboration of researchers from all over the world where we look at topics like hypertrophy, strength, and the ketogenic diet, and other diets as well. So in 2017, we started doing reviews on the ketogenic diet. For example, reviews on how it affects hunger, or how it affects performance, athletic performance. And in 2019, we were Brad Schoenfeld. He asked us to write a paper for him in the Strength and Conditioning Journal about the ketogenic diet for bodybuilders, because he wanted to publish an issue that's about bodybuilding, that's unique to that. So we are bringing in the perspective of the ketogenic diet here, and to evaluate how good is it for bodybuilding, what are the potential benefits, and what are the potential downsides of the diet. So that's like the background for how the paper was written.
So interestingly enough, 35 years ago, Dr. Mauro Di Pasquale, which I know everybody has a lot of respect for that's in this category, who knows who he is, wrote a book called The Anabolic Diet. And the anabolic diet was basically 5 days a week of strict keto, and then 2 days a week of introducing carbohydrates back into the diet. He called it the phase shift keto diet, is what he called it back then, ketogenic diet. And a lot of athletes built a lot of muscle using that diet. So today we people are strict keto, like carbohydrates are evil. I no carbs. I don't want to be kicked out of ketosis, which I think is an amusing idea. What are we missing? What did we learn today that Dr. Di Pasquale didn't understand yesterday?
So it seems like he did a cyclical diet, right? Where he had periods of high carb and periods of low carb, and he didn't focus too much on the ketones, if I'm understanding it correctly, right? So
I guess you could say that. I mean, he knew that his athletes were producing ketones throughout the week, but it wasn't like, today we have test our urine, test our breath, test our blood. Oh, I'm at the 2.2 millimoles. I don't think that they were doing that back then, obviously.
Yeah, so it's very easy to get stuck on a specific number. For example, your blood ketone levels, and you can say, okay, I have to be at that level or else I'm failing the diet. But I think that's definitely not a good perspective, because even though ketosis can have many benefits, it is not an issue if you go out and back into ketosis. I'm not too familiar with this author, but he's definitely correct in that bodybuilders can gain mass and can use the ketogenic diet in their training regimen or as a diet. So what we wanted to look at in the paper was how effective is this? Like if you compare, for example, a low-fat diet that's like high carb, low fat, compared to a ketogenic diet, which is high fat, low carb. We wanted to see, when we reviewed the literature, we wanted to see what does that say as a whole, like which diet would be better for bodybuilders, and also how useful is the ketogenic diet. So do you want me to summarize the findings? Or?
Yeah. I want you to summarize, but explain to the audience, first of all, how this study was designed. This was kind of like a meta-analysis, right?
Yeah, it was like a review. So we reviewed the literature, like Science of Fitness. We've been working on the ketogenic diet for 3 years now. So we reviewed most of the aspects of the ketogenic diet. So what this paper was, it was a distillation, right? Where we took all the results from the various reviews and we kind of summarized it for bodybuilders in this review paper. So it was a lot of, we had, I believe we have like 200 citations or something along those lines.
Wow. That's a pretty big group of papers to consolidate. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about what you found. What did you learn?
Sure. So we have many aspects here. We looked at, I can tell a bit about what we actually looked at here in the diet. So we looked at, first we looked at the basics, things like macronutrients. For example, people say that you need to eat low protein to be in ketosis. So we looked at that. We looked at hunger. How does the keto affect hunger, and how does that affect bodybuilders? Performance, strength in the gym, hypertrophy, how it affects muscle mass, and also things like fat loss. How is it better for fat loss, or is it similar to other diets? And we also looked at things like side effects. For example, when you start the diet, you will experience some side effects, and we wanted to see how you could prevent those side effects, because those can be very detrimental to bodybuilders. Before a show, you can't have a lot of negative side effects when you're starting a new diet. And we also evaluated ketone supplements. For example, ketone supplements have in their marketing said that they will burn your fat, or they will make you stronger or faster. So we wanted to see if ketone supplements can be useful for bodybuilders.
Did you look only at ketone salts, or did you look at ketone esters as well?
Ketone salts and ketone esters.
Now, and did you look at the Veach ester specifically?
No, we didn't differentiate between the different esters or the different salts. Like we review them as a whole. And I believe there are about 16 papers now. However, most of them are for endurance athletes and not for, there are no studies for ketone supplements on bodybuilders specifically. But I think you raise an important question, because different esters can have different effects on different people. So it's a very important question indeed.
Okay, so now let's talk about what you learned. So let's talk first about gaining muscle. Is it possible to gain muscle? Appreciable muscle, the same type of muscle if you're eating a high protein, high carb, low fat diet, which is a typical bodybuilding diet, on a strict keto diet?
For sure, you can gain muscle on the ketogenic diet. So I can take you through the findings, what we found when we looked at the literature. Now, we don't have a ton of studies on bodybuilders, so that's a bit of a challenge. But what we do have is studies on people that are similar to bodybuilders. For example, Paoli has a study from gymnasts from 2012. And gymnasts, they have to be very low body fat, and they have to be strong as hell, and they have a lot of muscle mass. So they're very similar to bodybuilders. So we looked at, for example, the gymnast, and we compare, okay, how does this work for bodybuilders? It's a comparison. So the gymnasts, in general, we found that gymnasts and powerlifters, they can maintain muscle mass on the diet, but we see no strong evidence that it's very easy to build a lot of muscle on the diet. Now, there's a difference between like optimal building and being able to build and optimal building. So to build optimally, you need like a caloric surplus, right? So you need to eat more. You need to eat more calories than what you usually do. What we found in several studies is that they told powerlifters and other populations, you should eat more on the ketogenic diet, right? We want you to gain muscle mass. What happened is that the ketogenic diet is very good at reducing hunger, right? So you feel less hungry and you eat fewer calories.
Less.
Exactly. So that's the challenge, right? Because on one hand, it's a great tool for like fat loss, but it's not so good. You need to be hungry when you want to bulk. Like in the off season, bodybuilders, they need to bulk, they need to eat more, they need to pack on mass, and that was that seems to be a bit of a challenge, which is why we recommended in the paper that for off-season bulking, ketogenic diet is generally, you can experiment with it and try it out, but there is no evidence that it's like optimal for building a lot of muscle mass because of the hunger reducing effect. It will be harder for you to eat.
I have a solution for that. Anybody listening to the show right now, if you do want to build mass on the keto diet, and gastric emptying, which affects satiety, is standing in your way from eating 6 or 7 meals. Because let's face it, if you're eating high fat, we're talking about the most calorically dense macronutrient in the world. But if you can only eat 2 or 3 times a day, you're not going to put on any muscle. Well, here's what you do. You get some GHRP6 and you do about 150 micrograms 15 to 20 minutes before you want to eat, and you will be able to eat again in 3 hours, because GHRP6 is a powerful gastric prokinetic. It actually speeds up digestive motility, and it speeds up the efficiency of the body to extract nutrients from your food. So it's like if there was a switch and your stomach and intestines ran on normal and you could switch it to high, that's what GHRP6 does. So if you use GHRP6 on the keto diet, I predict you'll be able to bulk, because you'll still be able to eat 5 or 6 very, very nutrient dense meals, and you'll digest all the food, and you'll probably poop a log at the end of the day or the next morning, but it'll work. It works. I guarantee you it works. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sure. So I think that sounds interesting. Maybe we should do a review on that as well, to see how it affects, if there are maybe studies on gaining muscle mass while taking that supplement. Also, I want to say that, so this research, it does not mean that you can't gain muscle mass on a ketogenic diet, because it's at averages, right? It looks at a group of people and looks at the average. Now, you will have people that individuals are not averages, right? So, for example, a very good example of somebody who's a great bodybuilder on the ketogenic diet is Luis Villasenor. He's the Keto Gains, sort of the head of Keto Gains, along with Tyler Cartwright. And Luis shows us that it's quite possible to be able to be a bodybuilder on the ketogenic diet. So you have to differentiate between what's going to probably work on average and what's going to work for individuals. So that's an important distinction.
Because there were people in those study groups that put on a lot of muscle. There were people in those study groups that put on or lost muscle, and we're saying, oh, here is the middle. But we shouldn't pay attention to the middle. We should have just said, how many people put on a lot of muscle and what was a lot of muscle? And we should have just looked at that group, in my opinion. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm not a researcher.
Sure. I think that's a good point, because what you need to do is to look at the people who did gain a lot of muscle and see what characterizes those people. And in every study, there's going to be responders and non-responders. So basically, a responder is somebody who responds very well to whatever they're doing. And a non-responder is somebody who responds very poorly to what's going on. So for example, it's possible that you're a responder to one diet, but you're a non-responder to a different diet. So, but that's like, that's a lot of scientific, I don't want to get into the weeds of the scientific non-responders and responders, but it's interesting to know that
there's always outliers. There's always outliers. Always.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
So from a gaining muscle standpoint, if we agree that while we were looking at the average, that there were people who gained muscle in all of these groups, and had we known what that muscle gain was and just focused on them for a moment, we could say that gaining muscle on a ketogenic diet is possible with certain conditions. Now, we don't know what those conditions are at this point in time, but we know that you can gain. Now, if no one gained muscle, if there was one group just maintained muscle and the rest of them lost muscle, then we say, no, there's no way to gain muscle. But because some people were able to gain muscle, then we need to know, we have to understand the conditions that led to their muscle gains on this diet.
Absolutely. And so it's very hard to say, because, it could be something, maybe they trained harder, or maybe they had some genetic predispositions. I can't, it would be like speculative for me to try to figure out what exactly the reasons were, but it's possible. And, but what we conclude is from the averages, it's that it's suboptimal, that it's, per the research today, there is no strong reason to believe that you will pack on a ton of muscle with the ketogenic diet.
Right, because if you do a traditional bodybuilding diet, which is high protein, moderate carbohydrates, and low fat, we know that everybody puts on muscle. Then it becomes an issue of how much muscle do they put on. So I agree with that. What about leanness? Obviously, bodybuilders during bulk season want to put on as much fat-free mass as possible. And they often end up having to spend 12, 16, 20 weeks leaning out, which then they give up a lot of muscle. Is there a, to steal the term you just used, does the ketogenic diet lean towards producing lean gains where you don't have to diet for 16 weeks to step on stage?
Right. So you're talking about like body recomposition, where you can lose fat and gain muscle at the same time. Now, this is a very interesting concept, because a lot of people, for a long time, people have said this is not possible. You cannot do both at the same time. You need to be either bulking or you need to be only cutting. But again, we have reviewed this literature, and there is, I believe, at least 20 studies that show both untrained and trained lifters can lose fat and build muscle mass at the same time. So in terms of losing fat, the ketogenic diet is it's great, because for the first point is that it reduces hunger, right? So you reduce hunger, you don't have to count calories, you just naturally eat less. That's perhaps like one of the strongest benefits of the ketogenic diet that we've seen. So for both for bodybuilders and for regular people, you don't have to count calories. You will naturally feel less hungry. That's very good. And also in terms of fat loss, it's when you eat less, you reduce calories and you lose fat. So it's we definitely recommend that in terms of the in-season phase for bodybuilders when they go into the competition preparation. And definitely, if you use the ketogenic diet, you can also use that to become lean, to reduce fat mass.
So here's an interesting comment by Lewis.
Yes.
And as we've established, he's a successful bodybuilder using the keto diet. And he says something that I'm a firm believer. In fact, it pisses me off when people classify the keto diet as only this way. My attitude is, if you eat 2 packets of salt a day and nothing else, or 2 packets of sugar a day and nothing else, and you produce ketones, that's a keto diet. Any diet that leads to the production of ketones is a keto diet. But for some reason, we've ended up with this, just like politics and religion and everything else, these staunch groups. No, you've got to eat 80% fat. And that's a high fat diet. That's not a keto diet, because you could be in ketosis on a high protein diet. But he says here, as you can see, more so the issue with keto when speaking about bodybuilding is that people apply keto very differently. Number one, people undereat protein. I believe that, because keto. Number two, people overly restrict carbs and you can stay ketogenic at 30 to 40, 80 grams of carbs a day. And that's what Dr. DePasquale in his original book was 60 grams of carbs during the week or less. And then you can have carb refeeds on the weekend. More people, and then he also says, also add them around training, targeted ketogenic diets. I love, there's a sugar that I love that Josh Field turned me on to. It's called cyclic dextrin. You take it right before training, and it burns up during your training, and you're back in ketosis an hour after you've trained, even though you had 60 grams of sugar. So I'm a big believer in that. It's total amount of calories, protein, that matters most. I agree. And he goes on to say this. Let's just get this in. I do agree. Keto is not the one that will give you the best muscular gains, but it's a great compromise for lean bulking or lean gaining. It's also a great tool for recreational bodybuilders, basically people who are not going to step on stage, but just want to improve their physiques and look like they could step on stage. I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. What do you think?
I think he makes a great point about the protein, because again, from what I can read online, a lot of people seem to be afraid of protein on the ketogenic diet, in that they're worried that it will prevent ketosis or something. But when we look at the data, we have, I believe, 14 studies where people eat a high protein diet and they're in ketosis. So it's you can eat as much protein as you want. It won't prevent ketosis.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. So people are under the impression that gluconeogenesis is something that just happens like that. Gluconeogenesis is a very metabolically expensive process, and it's only used generally during famine and starvation. So this idea that, oh, you had a big steak and now it's going to kick you out of ketosis is silly. First of all, gluconeogenesis does not just turn on like that. It's metabolically expensive, so the body has to work harder to produce glucose from that steak than it normally would. But more importantly, the body's not going to produce blood sugar that's going to range to 200. It's going to produce just what it needs and nothing more than that. The brain is telling it, okay, I'm happy now, you can stop. So we have to get people to stop this nonsense that gluconeogenesis is going to kick them out of ketosis because they're eating too much protein.
Definitely. I think you have a very good point there. Like, it's one of those things that when you look at the theory behind it, like, okay, gluconeogenesis will increase, and therefore, it will affect your insulin, it will affect your ketone production. But if you actually look at the data, that's not the case at all. So I'm definitely with you on that you don't have to worry at all about protein.
Well, and let's address this. So Jasu Fevrier says, was the protein worry more about whey protein rather than protein derived from whole foods like steak and chicken? This one is something that I am willing to understand better as well. If you're using a whey isolate, we know that it hits the bloodstream very quickly. But first, there must be a demand for glucose. In other words, the body's not going to turn leucine and glycine, these highly glucogenic amino acids, into sugar just because. The body has to say, turn on gluconeogenesis, we're in trouble. So I think that's subjective to where your blood sugar is at the moment. What do you think?
This has actually been tested in studies. There are multiple studies where they give participants protein, like protein supplements, whey protein shakes, alongside their ketogenic diet, and they're still in ketosis. So if somebody is claiming that whey protein or any protein will kick you out of ketosis, they should. I would be very happy to see the studies, because in our very vast search, we've yet to find any studies that say it prevents ketosis.
So clearly, when it comes to building lean muscle, the ketogenic diet does have an advantage over the high carbohydrate diet, correct?
Building lean muscle. So building muscle mass with less fat gain compared to...
Yes. A traditional bodybuilding diet.
This hasn't been tested as far as I know. Like,
Okay.
There's no study that tests this specifically. But it's good for losing fat, but I can't say that it's better for lean muscle gains. There's no studies on that, I believe.
I'm actually experimenting with a more traditional bodybuilding diet right now. I've been doing ultra low carbohydrate diets and intermittent fasting for a decade now. I think my body really wants a change. I can feel it. And so I just went to 5 meals and 6 meals a day, small meals. Generally 30 to 45 grams of protein, generally under 20 grams of carbohydrates, and some fats. And I got to tell you, in just a few days, I feel like my energy is up, and I'm getting hungry every 2 hours too. It's amazing how quickly the body shifts when food is available all of a sudden.
So you're probably talking about it affected your hunger as well, right? Did you feel more hungry or less hungry?
More hungry. I'm hungry.
Yeah.
I wake up hungry now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I wake up hungry.
That's one of the adaptations, right? So when you, it's also one of the reasons why you should, when you choose a level of calories, you should be careful about jumping, because if you go from 1,500 calories to 3,000, then like you say, you will be more hungry and you will be more likely to overeat. So that's something to think about, like slowly moving up and down the caloric ladder, if you will.
We're going to take our first commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk about strength and the keto diet. And I already see there's a post from one of our viewers about that, so we'll put that up as well. We're talking today with Adam Tzur. His website is sci-fit, SCI-fit, FIT.net. You can go there and learn more. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Spit that out right now. This is the Superhuman Channel.
Welcome back. We're talking with Adam Tzur from sci-fit.net, SCI-fit.net, about a recent study that his group published looking at the ketogenic diet for both bodybuilders and physique athletes. So now let's talk a little bit about strength. What happens when you are on a ketogenic diet as far as strength goes? And is there a difference between going keto and having been keto for a while?
That's a very good question. And so one of the first things that happen when you go on the ketogenic diet is that you eat fewer carbohydrates, of course, which reduces your muscle glycogen. Your muscle glycogen is your muscle's stored carbohydrate that is used during training, to fuel your workouts, right? So theoretically, if you have a low muscle glycogen, then theoretically your workouts should be it should be harder to work out. Now, what was very interesting here when we looked at the studies is that even if people eat keto and reduce their muscle glycogen, their strength does not seem to be affected. Now, strength is in most studies is measured by the 1 repetition maximum, right? So if you're doing very high intensity training, it shouldn't have any effect on that from what we can see.
So when you say high, so 1 rep maximum stays the same, but doesn't it seem logical that perhaps the number of reps you can do at that weight may stall for a little while initially? Although I'll ask you that question, then I'll tell you something that Dr. Di Pasquale said on my show years ago. Okay. Do you think that it would stall? I'm sorry. Do you think that your ability, like, let's say if you could do 10 reps with X weight, and then you go keto, doesn't it make sense that while you still may be strong enough to handle that weight, you maybe can't do 10 reps anymore?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that you can. It has not been tested directly in the literature, in the scientific literature. If, for example, your high repetitions, if you're doing like 20 reps or 15 reps, if that would decrease on the ketogenic diet. Now, personally, I've experienced that when I did a very low carbohydrate diet like 6 years ago. I found that in the gym, my 1 repetition maximum was good, but my 15 rep max, for isolation exercises, it was more difficult. Now, this has not been tested in studies, so we can't say for sure. But theoretically speaking, your muscle glycogen will be reduced, which could affect how much volume you can do and how many repetitions you could do. But this hasn't been shown in studies yet.
So Dr. Di Pasquale said on the show many, many years ago that on the ultra low carbohydrate type diet, whether it's high protein, high fat, or moderate both, but you're producing ketones, that muscle glycogen will be replenished in 24 hours because your body is still managing its blood sugar levels, and some of it is going to be used through the liver to create glycogen. And so that made me start to think, if in fact it's not really reducing muscle glycogen, and the only way you know this for sure is, are there studies that show muscle biopsies while on in ketosis that the glycogen is not being restored?
Yes. So in the first 6 weeks of the ketogenic diet, your muscle glycogen there's 6 studies on this, and muscle glycogen is reduced by 40 to 60%, depending on the study.
Wow.
That's very interesting, right? But there's also another study by Volek from 2016, Volek and his colleagues, right? And that shows that their muscle glycogen levels were normal for, I believe it was athletes that were endurance athletes, they had been like in ketosis for many years, and their muscle glycogen levels were normal. This indicates that with time, even though the muscle glycogen goes down the first 6, 8, 12 weeks, it might go up again over time. So that's very interesting. There's not too much data on this yet, like exactly when it shifts from going down to back up again, but it suggests that this might happen.
So there's another aspect to strength, and I don't mean 1 rep maximum, but the kind of strength where you're really applying yourself for long periods of time. And we know from research that fatigue starts in the brain and not peripherally in the muscles. And so could it be that the initial phases of the ketogenic diet are causing changes in neurochemicals? We know that serotonin. So if you take a high protein meal before you work out, leucine will block the uptake of serotonin by the brain, and serotonin is what imparts fatigue. Could there be a component of that happening when you're on the keto diet?
That's a really good question, a good insight. We haven't looked specifically at the brain chemistry and the data on that, but what we do know is that one of the side effects from the ketogenic diet during the first weeks is fatigue, and in some studies, weakness as well. That people report that they feel weaker and fatigued, for example, during workouts, but also otherwise in their daily lives. So, but this seems to go away with time, as keto flu. That's one of the symptoms of keto flu. It goes away after like 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. It depends a bit on the person.
Yeah, and Louis Villasenor just posted something that kind of summarizes what we were just saying, that it seems like once you get adapted, the glycogen starts to restore itself. And that's another reason for manipulating maybe pre-workout nutrients, especially if you are a fan of some of these advanced carbohydrate products like like cyclic dextrin, which if you take just the right amount and you have to experiment with a glucometer post-workout, you can actually dial in like a dose of maybe 40 grams, let's say, that gives you a massive charge of energy during your workout, and it's all burnt up shortly thereafter. He said, this is why I personally shifted from doing carb loads only necessary for peak weeks and shows to targeted keto diet. Going in and out of ketosis will hinder the process. Interesting. Very interesting. And he's talking about the process of replenishing glycogen, because and it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. The body, this speaks to my comment that gluconeogenesis is a very metabolically expensive process. The body just doesn't turn it on and turn it off. The body may wait weeks and go, okay, this fool can't find carbohydrates, so we're going to have to start producing a little bit more glucose so that we can replenish and top off glycogen.
That's one of the things. I think you have a great point there, because the body, it's adapted to survive. It's not adapted to be a bodybuilder. So it will do things to maximize survival. So you have to kind of work around that, right? You have to work around your body trying to survive. The body will shed muscle. That's what happens typically when people go on a weight loss diet, they lose a lot of muscle mass as well, because the muscle mass is metabolically, it's expensive. It uses energy, right? So you want to get rid of it so you can survive. That's why you have to eat a lot of protein. You have to do resistance training and get great recovery. There's so many things you need to do to kind of fight your body's urge to just get rid of the muscles. So yeah, that's a challenge for bodybuilders specifically. Yeah.
Oguz Han says, would it be negative for the ketosis if you load carbs for a few days after some weeks of dieting? And I think that really depends on your goal. If your goal is to become adapted, it probably is a bad idea. If your goal is to go in and out of ketosis, then you may not ever be able to do anything but go in and out of ketosis, because you're going to always need those carbs.
I think, it depends on your goals, really. Like if your goals are to be in ketosis, then you should do what you want to be in ketosis. But you can still reach other goals. You can gain muscle mass, you can fix your hunger, you can reduce fat mass while being in ketosis or outside of ketosis, or you can do something that's in the middle where you go cyclically. You reduce carbs for a period and then you increase carbs for a period. It has to be like ketosis is not the only measure of success, which I think is very important. Like ketosis can be important, but don't only focus on having like a certain number read on your ketone strip or whatever it is.
And that's actually silly. Everybody is chasing who has the highest millimoles, and that really doesn't play into any of this sort of stuff. It's just like, okay. So lastly, what about conditioning? The ability to endure. This is kind of where the keto diet excels, right? Once you're adapted, so to speak.
Once you're adapted, right? So one of the benefits or proposed benefits of a ketogenic diet is that when your body shifts from using carbohydrates and it starts using fats and ketones instead to fuel activities. Now, these are more like slow or kind of like endurance activities, right? Because your body relies more on fat oxidation during, like, for example, a jog. It doesn't need carbohydrates. That's more like during intense exercise, like in the gym. So what we looked at in this paper is specifically like the gym and lifters and how it affects like how important carbohydrates are. Now, in terms of endurance, the evidence is somewhat mixed, because there's actually been some studies suggest that keto is better for endurance athletes. But some studies, for example, in like elite race walkers, I believe it was, they found that they spent longer walking a certain round or a certain kind of competitive round. So they spent more time. So the evidence is a bit mixed exactly, but you can definitely have high endurance on the ketogenic diet as well.
But you have to be adapted first. Really, that's what it comes down to, right? And it takes a while. Commercial break. We're talking today with Adam Tzur. His website is sci-fit.net, sci-fit.net. Go check it out. We'll be right back with more of Superhuman Radio.
This is the Superhuman Channel, where we use oxygen for the power of good.
Welcome back. Before we go into the wrap-up questions, which I have, typical wrap-up questions I have on every interview, Aiden Ray has a question. He says, anything on reducing the tempo of lifting sessions to govern heart rate while on keto, i.e. nix circuits, more time under tension, not move into glycolytic territory? What do you think about that?
So I don't think that's a very amazing question, but I don't think there's so much research on that. Like, there's no study that's looked at time under tension, for example, and keto, even though I would really like to see that. In terms of not moving into glycolytic territory, well, that's bound to happen if you're doing lifting. Like if you're doing strength training, like your glycolytic pathways energy system is activated. Like you can't really get around that. You have to you're using glycogen and you're using carbohydrates when you're lifting. Now, of course, if you're doing like 1 rep maxes, then you're not using that energy system as much. But in general, the question is very complex, and I don't believe there's much research on that.
What was most amazing? What surprised you the most when the study was finally published and the numbers all added up?
So I think there was many things that we thought was exceptionally interesting. It was fun to see which kind of myths were not actually factually correct. Like, for example, the protein thing, right? You can eat as much protein as you want, but before we did this review, we didn't know that. We just we assumed the opposite, which was true. We kind of expected to see that as you eat a lot of protein, you will not be able to be in ketosis, and it will not be good for bodybuilders. But you were very surprised by that. So that was a very interesting, and also, the reduced hunger of keto was very kind of surprising as well.
So it's fairly understood that being in a state of ketosis drives insulin down, correct?
Yes.
Okay, but high saturated fat meals has the ability to drive insulin up, even in the absence of carbohydrates. At least that's what we've learned from a lot of the older studies that made saturated fats bad for us.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of interesting dichotomy. If you're eating a high saturated fat meal, let's say a big Wagyu ribeye, and that should drive insulin up, but being in ketosis drives it down. And when insulin goes up, can it kick you out of ketosis? Can rising insulin kick you out of ketosis?
I believe they've tested this in some studies where they had like insulin transfusions, or they had transfusions with sugar into the bloodstream. And so, yes, there's a relationship between insulin and ketosis. However, I think what we need to look at is from so the question is kind of from a meal to meal basis, right?
Right.
But I think it's key to look at from a whole day or a whole week. So yes, you will go in and out of ketosis maybe during the day. And actually, there's a great study of this. I believe it's from 2016 that shows that during the day, your ketones rise and fall. When you're sleeping, your ketones are different. Right after exercise or during exercise, your ketones are lower because you're using them. And that doesn't mean that even though you temporarily kind of went out of ketosis, that doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's just like a response to, like you say, the things you eat or the exercise you do, or if you're sleeping. Are many things that can affect ketosis temporarily. But the most important question is, how is are you in ketosis during the day or during the week? I think that's more like a key question.
And what about ketone supplements? Are they wise for bodybuilders to use to either offset the entry to ketosis or to take as a pre-workout? Any opinion on that?
Yes, so we looked at that, and the ketone supplements, they don't seem to improve endurance performance, and they don't seem to improve strength. Well, there's not really studies on strength, but we don't have any reason for bodybuilders in the paper. We do not recommend taking ketone supplements, because why do that when you can buy creatine, or you can buy a beta-alanine, or anything, caffeine, anything that has much stronger evidence base. Ketones, in terms of going into ketosis, ketones do make you go into ketosis, but they actually prevent your body. It's called endogenous ketosis. They prevent your body from creating its own ketones. So you have to be very careful with ketone supplements because they temporarily prevent you from making your own ketones.
Interesting comment. And Lewis, we need to get you on the show, by the way. I don't know why we haven't had you on the show already. But, to summarize what he said, the idea of, what kicks you out of ketosis, a high fat meal. And he said, it's more about how long it kicks you out of ketosis, which I think is interesting. It's like a high carb meal can kick you out of ketosis for days, he said. But, maybe some saturated fat will kick you out for raising insulin from saturated fat. Will actually kick you out for seconds or minutes. And so, and this is what happens with all this diet stuff. To steal a comment that my good friend Joel Green likes to use is that we too many of us talk in baby talk. This is good. That's bad. Nutrition is much more sophisticated than that. There's nuances like this. How long does it kick you out of ketosis? Maybe being kicked out of ketosis for minutes is worth it for the meal that you're having. And then he also says that, and I believe this, exogenous ketones actually blunt lipolysis. Sure, because your body doesn't have to convert fats into ketones if it's getting them from someplace else. This is something I've said for a long time. I would love people in the keto space to start distinguishing between ketosis and ketolysis. A ketone supplement doesn't put you into ketosis. It puts you into ketolysis. You're using ketones. Being in a state of ketosis means your body is making the ketones that your body is then using. So until we start to become more specific about the terminology that we use, these supplement companies are going to be able to say whatever they want. Ketolysis and ketosis are very, very different phenomenons. They work hand in hand. But if you're taking a supplement, you're in ketolysis. You're using ketones your body didn't produce.
For sure. And, researchers, they use the terms endogenous ketosis and exogenous ketosis. So endogenous ketosis is like within, and exogenous ketosis is kind of from without, from the outside. So I think you're making a great point about that for sure.
In summary, in just a couple minutes, what do you hope clinicians and other people within the keto space take away from this research paper?
I hope that this paper is like the beginning of research into bodybuilders that go on the ketogenic diet, because right now there's a severe lack of ketogenic diet for bodybuilder studies. We need to see, for example, like people asked on this show, like how does it affect time under tension? Or you asked about the repetitions, like how does it affect your 15 repetition maximum, not just your 1 repetition maximum? How does it affect your volume over the week? How much volume can you do in the gym? Like there are so many questions that we need answers for, and I really hope that clinicians, researchers can look into that. And also for coaches, you can definitely experiment with your athletes and your lifter and ask them to use the ketogenic diet. But also you have to be careful. The ketogenic diet side effects can be harmful. So if you jump on the ketogenic diet, maybe like 3 weeks before a show, you might experience a lot of negative side effects and it can mess up your show. So you need to be careful. You need to adapt, and you also need to take like fiber supplements and electrolyte supplements, because the ketogenic diet, it makes you more dehydrated and you urinate out electrolytes like salt, for example. So you have to drink more, get more fiber, and get more electrolytes. So it will prevent the negative side effects.
Yeah, exactly. All right, listen, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. It's a fascinating paper, and I hope you do spark more research in this area, because I'm more interested in bodybuilding and ketogenic diet, because I'm not a jogger, I'm not a runner, I'm not a biker. Well, I ride a motorcycle, that kind of biker. But I want to know more about what it does for me as a weightlifter. I really do. Thank you so much for being here today, Adam.
Thanks, Carl. It was a real pleasure to be on this show with you.
Thank you.